In California, you're seeing a lot of ads on Proposition 50. Today, we bring you all perspectives on this proposition, from yes to no to I haven't decided yet, and why. We'll go deep on explaining what this proposition is about.
The real problem here is voters are being asked to give away their power, which is never a good idea. If they realize that they can get a majority of Californians to vote against their own interest, they will do it again.
We were very clear about that. We asked Texas not to do this. We said, if you do this, we're going to do this. And they continued to do it because they want to seek an advantage in the House of Representatives. And so this was our counter to that.
You give it to an independent commission, there's people who try to influence the commission. There's people who have their own personal beliefs. They're human beings just like lawmakers. You give it to the legislature, they're going to try to draw districts that benefit them and the majority party. There is no perfect way to do it. I'll tell you what's imperfect, is breaking our country's traditions. That part bothers me. It was wrong. It was morally wrong for Texas to redraw their maps in the middle of the decade. Does that make it morally right for California to do the same as a reaction? That's what the voters have to decide with Prop 50.
I'm Siama Karami. Welcome to California Insider. Mike, it's great to have you back and welcome back.
It's great to be here.
Proposition 50. This is a big thing right now happening in California. Tell us more about it.
Well, Proposition 50 is a reaction to what Texas was doing. Proposition 50 would redistrict all of California's congressional districts in the middle of the decade. Here we are in 2025. And it would change those congressional lines quite profoundly. It's getting us embroiled in a national fight where there's some things that have occurred in other states in the country that Governor Newsom and the backers of Prop 50 are reacting to. The challenge is, is that, it's okay to say Texas is wrong, but it's kind of strange to say, well, we're going to react with something that's wrong too. A lot of us grew up learning that two wrongs don't make a right. A lot of us grew up learning that an eye for an eye makes everybody blind. So there are some of us who have a little bit of anxiety about the direction the country is heading with all of these redistricting fights around the country. When Prop 50 was originally sold to people, it was explained, well, Texas did it this way for Republicans and California is going to reply and it's going to do that for Democrats. But I think piece of the puzzle that is missing in that statement is that, well, yeah, but then Indiana and Missouri and all these other states that are Republican controlled are going to do the same thing. And so it might be one of those things where even for the Democratic Party, it's a battle that they can't win.
There is a commission in California that we have voted for, right? And that is being in charge of this. Can you tell us what will change?
Very little will change in the long term if Prop 50 passes, but you're correct. So in 2010, the voters of the state of California took the redistricting power away from politicians. They gave it to an independent commission. Now, how independent that commission really is anybody's guess. There have been lots of accusations from many different sides, but the point is that redistricting is no longer done by the legislature. This would say, well, for this little one, redistricting that we're doing in the middle of the decade, we're going to pass the maps that the legislature passed before they left session this year, and we're going to actually put those on the ballot, and the voters are going to ratify those, and we're going to use those until 2032.
As someone reporting on California's economy and policies every week, unfortunately, I see the middle class shrinking in California. Some of it has to do with our policies, and there is another side to this that we are facing major inflation here and across the country. Unfortunately, the dollar has lost 10% of its value just this year to date. That's why more and more people are turning to real assets to protect their financial future, like physical gold and silver from American Hard-Forged Gold. Unlike paper assets, these tangible investments can't be controlled or devalued by inflation or bad policies. You can have them delivered straight to your home or securely stored in a tax-advantaged gold IRA, giving you a safe, reliable way to safeguard your wealth, no matter what happens in California or the rest of the country. American Hard-Forged Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of 5-star reviews. And right now, when you call, you can get up to $15,000 in free silver with your first purchase. Call 866-595-2304. That's 866-595-2304. Or text Cali to 65532. Beat the system and protect your wealth with something real today.
You were a politician yourself, like you have been in the legislature. Can you tell us what's your perspective on politicians being able to control this?
Sure. So, I mean, look, redistricting, mischief, or gerrymandering, as people call it, it's nothing new, right? Gerrymandering is named after Elbridge Gerry, who was governor of Massachusetts during the War of 1812. So that's how far the practice goes back. And gerrymander is a portmanteau of his last name and the word salamander. And the whole idea was that the legislature during that time passed some lines, and one of them resembled a lizard. And so a newspaper came to call it a gerrymander, Elbridge Gerry salamander. The challenge, though, is that modern technology makes it different from 1812. In 1812, you could guess. You could say, I think most of my voters are over here, so draw a line to get those voters into my district. Now, you've got data points from cookies on your computer and from all sorts of other things, polling data, demographic data, census data, where you can say this person is a left-handed Catholic who is 42 years old, who is registered as a Democrat, but he always votes Republican. They have so much data that they can draw districts with tremendous precision. So it's a little different from how things were, last century or the century before it. This is what the public should know. There is no perfect way to draw districts. There is no perfect way to draw districts. If you said we're going to create a rule where a computer just goes and tries to create the most square districts, well, I would have two reactions to that. Do you start at the top of the state? Do you start at the bottom of the state? Do you start on the left or the right? Because how that first square is drawn is going to affect all the other squares. And if you start at the bottom of the state, you could imagine a map that favors Democrats. You start at the top of the state, it might favor Republicans. If a computer were to draw it, just blindly, right? We have faith in technology. Would you allow cities to be torn up? Would you allow cities to be divided into several districts? Yeah, if a computer's doing it, just trying to make a square, it's going to do that. You give it to an independent commission, there's people who try to influence the commission. There's people who have their own personal beliefs. They're human beings just like lawmakers, right? You give it to the legislature, they're going to try to draw districts that benefit them and the majority party. There is no perfect way to do it. I'll tell you what's imperfect. What's imperfect is breaking our country's traditions. That part bothers me. We don't have a national law that says you have to redistrict every 10 years, but we've done that pretty much every 10 years since the dawn of the Republic. It was wrong. It was morally wrong for Texas to redraw their maps in the middle of the decade. Does that make it morally right for California to do the same as a reaction? That's what the voters have to decide with Prop 50.
So you think this is more about traditions, the values that we stand by when it comes to elections?
Countries start to go on the decline when they start to ignore their traditions. When political expedient is somehow treated as more important than the rules that we have always played by. An easy example, right, is there are many countries around the world that have had free speech at various times in their existence. But something will happen and a dictator will take power and they'll say, well, we just need to suspend free speech right now just because of this threat. There's a threat out there, so we have to suspend free speech. Free speech never comes back. That's a challenge. And so in this circumstance, right, you have Texas breaking with tradition, and then you have California saying, okay, well, we're going to break with tradition too. And then Missouri and Indiana and Illinois and all these other states do it. And before you know it, why don't we just redistrict every 2 years then? Why don't we just have a continual state of redistricting to benefit whatever political party thinks that it's needed? You have to follow the traditions.
In terms of getting the aid from federal government, California is contributing a lot. We pay a lot of taxes. How would we get impacted if we had these changes?
I don't think the redistricting fight is going to change that much at all. I mean, you could argue that if we had a Democratic president, again, having more Democratic Congress members will be more voices to argue for California with a Democratic president. We don't have a Democratic president right now, so for the next several years, it's not going to matter at all. It might even hurt things because, again, the state will not have those Republican voices who might be close with the administration in power right now. These things are all, I think, minor considerations, though, again, compared to the fact that it seems like again and again in our country, we are doing things that would shock the founding fathers, doing things that would shock traditionalists even from 20 years ago. And these things are just becoming a regular part of the political toolkit in 2025.
In terms of this Proposition 50 that a lot of Californians are voting for and staring at, they have to deal with it. You're kind of torn, right? What do you think people should think about when they're voting?
Well, it depends, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who just want to say, hey, I want to fight back. I want to fight back about what Texas is doing, so I'm going to vote yes on it. That's one option, sure. There's other people who say, you know, I don't like the fact that all these states are breaking with tradition, so I'm going to rebel against that, and I'm going to vote no. There's other people who will just not get beyond what do the Democrats tell me to do, what do the Republicans tell me to do. And then there's other people who will just be confused. They'll say, why are we voting in the middle of November, in the middle of an odd year? They won't know what to do. I think it is entirely possible to see all of the angles and to say, I'm not happy with the breach of tradition. I'm not happy with where this means for where our country is headed, but I'm going to do what I feel is right in my own heart. It's tough though, because the commercials, they don't seem to talk about all these nuances. The commercials are presenting this, to Democrats as this is a fight against Trump. The commercials are presenting this to Republicans as this is the most evil thing in the world because it's destroying your right to representative government and it's overriding the commission that the voters themselves chose. But of course, if the voters do approve Prop 50, they would be overriding themselves. That's one of the ironies. And so, that irony is not lost on me, that the voters do have that power.
Now we go to Will O'Neill, who's on the no side of this proposition.
Right now, there are 52 seats in Congress in California. Only 9 of them are actually Republican. Prop 50, if done the way the line drawers want it to be done, would drop that down to 4. So you'd only have 4 members of Congress who are Republican in a 52-member state. That is a real problem because not only are you now silencing the voices of millions of Californians who voted for who they wanted in Congress, you are now going to ensure that we are diluting the power of California by making it so blue that a Republican administration and a Republican Congress really won't want to pay that much attention to our state, which would be a travesty for our local communities. Under the Independent Redistricting Commission, they made sure that they had communities of interest drawn together. Cities, counties, racial groups, backgrounds, ethnicities. They ensured you had groups of people together in ways that made a lot of sense. This, though, would break that all apart. You have these line drawings where if you were looking up in the sky and looking at clouds, you would start saying, that looks like an elephant, that looks like a spider, things like that, because these lines have been drawn in such a hyper-partisan way that no natural way of drawing them would have created what we're seeing. So for example, the Congressional District 45, which is here in Orange County, would actually start looking like a spider where it starts in Fountain Valley, goes all the way up to Norwalk, Yorba Linda, and Seal Beach. It makes no sense. You have the 42nd Congressional District, Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, now all of a sudden combined up with Long Beach. Why? Because the blue of Long Beach would dilute the red of those cities. It's a real problem because here in Orange County, for example, we have 6 members of Congress. This would actually break up it to 8. That might sound good because you'd have more members of Congress. It's bad because what happens is it starts pushing power outside of Orange County, and now you actually have to reach out to a lot more people who don't owe their votes to Orange County and are actually going to make sure that more resources are going into areas not represented by areas that are heavy Republican.
What's the impact of that when you say a city would get divided into 3 congressional districts?
Yeah, it's going to make your city far less powerful. And what that means is you're going to have a much harder time actually getting federal resources, getting federal attention if you have more members of Congress than you have right now. And I was mayor of Newport Beach twice. We worked with our members of Congress. We had a lot of federal agencies we needed to work through. Having just one member of Congress representing our entire city was really important to us because we could always go to that person, and that person would be accountable to the whole city for re-election purposes. They needed our votes. When you carve up a city like Santa Ana into 3 different districts, and by the way, it's not just Santa Ana, the tiny little city of Placentia actually also gets carved into 3. Mission Viejo gets carved up all over the place. Newport Beach, in fact, gets carved up so that 2/3 of the city will go up and be represented by someone from Long Beach. You end up in this real problem where the resources that you need from the federal government, or try to push away some of the regulations and rules from the federal government, you have a harder time getting those resources into your city when the power gets dispersed. Let's say you're mayor of Santa Ana and you say, hey, I've got this federal problem. Who are you going to go to? You're going to go to maybe 1 or 2 or all 3 of them, try to get on a calendar of members of Congress, give them calls and see what they say. They don't have as much incentive to be as responsive to you because they don't have as much of your district anymore. Whereas right now you've got Lou Correa, who's a congressman, pretty much owes his job in Congress to the city of Santa Ana. It's so big. But once you start spreading it out and making sure that other people have a little bit of responsibility for that city, but not a lot, then you start having those phone calls go unanswered.
The proponents are saying this is just temporary.
Yeah, this is not temporary. The lines that were drawn by the Independent Redistricting Commission, which was an overwhelmingly positive thing to change to an Independent Redistricting Commission so that we didn't have legislators who were drawing lines picking the voters. We want voters to pick their legislators, not the other way around. And so the lines that were drawn by the Independent Redistricting Commission, those lines will never come back. They are redrawn and completely destroyed. And so when they say it's temporary, what they're really saying is next time in 2032, 3 cycles after President Trump is out of the White House, then we'll get back to this. And the problem is, at what point do we really think they're going to try to give the power back to the people once they have it? The real problem here is voters are being asked to give away their power, which is never a good idea. If they realize that they can get a majority of Californians to vote against their own interest, they will do it again, probably in a bigger way, and try to redraw the state lines in addition to the congressional ones.
They have to do another proposition to do that, right?
They would, because this is in our state constitution. That's what we put in 2008 and again in 2010. And the same people who opposed it then, the California Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi, are the same people opposing it this time.
The proponents are saying that this is happening because if Texas does that, then the balance will shift to Republicans and Congress will have, the Republicans will have more power and then less money will come to California. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so more money would actually come to California with more Republicans in Congress if Republicans control Congress, right? So if the concern is, oh, Republicans control Congress, we need to gerrymander. Well, what you're really doing is you're suppressing a voice of millions of Californians who voted for President Trump, who vote for Republicans. Over 40% of the votes in Congress, in congressional races in this last cycle, went to Republicans, and we only have 18% or so of the seats. It's actually, the lines are already skewed enough. This would drop us down to about 7% representation. So if people are actually concerned about bringing resources back to California, you need balance in California, not this. And as far as Texas goes, that's a red herring. Texas was being sued by the Biden administration for some of their lines. Eventually, Texas came around and said, fine, we'll redraw the lines. The difference between 2020 and 2024, though, is that a lot of voters moved right, especially Hispanic voters in Texas. So they're actually adding minority-majority representation in Texas through these lines. And the reason that they're moving more to the right is because people move to the right. But realistically, California, though, is a totally different beast. And so I was asked recently, what's your message to President Trump and Republicans in Texas? I have no message to President Trump or Republicans in Texas. I only have message to voters in California because I don't get to vote for anything in Texas. Whatever they're doing over there does not directly affect me, and I can guarantee you they don't care what I say because I'm not a voter there. But I am a voter in California. So it's really important we talk about what the lines actually look like here, because you have a profile of an elephant up in Northern California right now. Why? Because you need the trunk of the elephant to snake down into a suburb area to grab a bunch of blue votes to dilute the red votes. You have a congressional district up at the top of California right now where you have all of Northern California, and then it kind of snakes down into Marin County right next to the Golden Gate Bridge. Why? So that all of those blue votes dilute the red votes, and it's actually faster if you are in the northeast portion of that district to drive south through Nevada turn west and drive through 6 congressional districts to reach the other side than it would be to drive through it. That's the problem with gerrymandering. You are destroying communities when you do this.
So you're saying the impact would be that to get support from that congressional member, it would be very difficult when you are on one side of these districts.
100%. Look at Illinois, for example. So one of the things that people are realizing right now is some of the biggest, bluest states in the union are already gerrymandered to the hilt. When you look at Maryland, when you look at New York, when you look at Illinois, they can't redraw those lines to find new seats because they're already too gerrymandered. And so what you have is a situation where if you go too partisan and too extreme, and the other party comes into power in Congress, guess what? You don't have anyone on that side of the aisle who can go advocate for your cause with the leadership in Congress. That's what California is going to find out really fast, because if this actually passes, and it does what they want it to do, out of 52 seats in Congress, only 4 of them would be Republican. And if you dilute that much under either a Republican presidency or a Republican Congress, all you're doing is excluding yourself and putting yourself as far away from power as you can.
Now we go to Michael Trujillo, who's on the yes side of Proposition 50. Here's how he argues.
Well, I think Prop 50 is important. After President Trump sort of pushed and demanded that Texas redistrict their congressional seats to get 5 more seats for Republicans, we saw that as a country and as a state and said, we're not going to let that happen. And so Governor Newsom and the Democrats here did everything they possibly could to see how they can at least neutralize what Texas is doing. And this is our solution. Texas didn't allow their voters to vote on whether or not they wanted to redistrict. California is. And so you're seeing democracy in action. I think a lot of folks are still upset about that, but at least they get to, make their vote, make their voice heard. And that's why we have the special election coming up in a few weeks. It would basically suspend the Independent Redistricting Commission for at least a few years until it comes back in 2030, 2032. And so it would then allow the legislature, just like Texas, to draw the seats, which it essentially has already. And so this isn't going to be done in darkness. We, as voters, know what all of these lines look like. We know what all of these maps look like. And so you're voting yes or no, pretty much on whether or not you want to adopt these maps. So this isn't something that the legislature could cut a deal and no one gets to say, or no one gets to make their voice heard. In this instance, every voter in California is eligible of either giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
The maps will be set for the next rounds as well?
The maps would be set for approximately 5 to 6 years until the next redistricting happens, which we do after we have our, every 10 years, we do a census where we count the number of folks living in the state. And then that determines how many congressional seats we get. And then we draw the maps after that. And that would go back to an independent redistricting commission. I think Democrats in California and other places want there to be independent redistricting commissions in all 50 states. But until then, when partisan maneuvers like President Trump is doing in Texas, we have to have the ability to counter that and allow a neutralization of what the Republicans are doing. So that way, when the vote for the House of Representatives comes up, hopefully Democrats take back the House and we could start writing the budgets in a way that accurately reflects America.
Does this go back to the commission after these 6 years?
Yes. So the way the proposition is written, this is just a temporary placeholder of maps until the commission is reconstituted after we do our next census. After the 2030 census, it would go to the Independent Redistricting Commission where they could alter all of these maps, and they likely will.
And out of these seats, so you mentioned 5 Texas, 5 Republican seats were taken. California wants to add 5 Democrat, right?
Yes. So this is, purely partisan. I don't want anyone to, be mistaken here. The Democratic Party and Democratic politicians are doing this to stop Republican Donald Trump and the Republican politicians in Texas. We were very clear about that. We asked Texas not to do this. We said, if you do this, we're going to do this. And they continued to do it because they want to seek an advantage in the House of Representatives. And so this was our counter to that, so they don't get an advantage in the House of Representatives.
Now, critics of this are saying that there was an independent commission and Californians voted for this. And California specifically didn't want the legislature to do this because they didn't want it to get political.
That is 100% true. And the only way to change that is to have Californians go to their ballot box and maybe they've changed their mind. And so this is the option to say, hey, if you've changed your mind, make your voice heard during this election. Right now, all the polls show that this is probably going to win fairly comfortably. And that should tell any critics that this is the direction Californians, a majority of Californians, want to go.
Michael, some people are saying when you put these maps together, certain communities might lose their voice.
Well, this is your chance to speak up during this special election and say, no, I don't want to lose my voice. And so you have the opportunity to vote no. My only thing I would remind folks is your counterparts in Texas, those American citizens in Texas, those residents in Texas that got bundled into communities or bundled into a district or a map that they did not want to be a part of, guess what? They didn't get to vote on that. They just had it happen to them by force. And so here in California, we're letting the residents and the citizens and the registered voters have that voice. That's the difference between California and Texas. And that's the reason why we're the fourth largest economy in the world and Texas isn't.
There's another thought that people might wonder, like after this redistricting, if people vote for it, if it gets the yes, it will be less than 10% of representatives from California would be Republican, while about 40% of the state votes Republican in the gubernatorial race. Do you think the state is going to disenfranchise these Republicans? Are people going to get pushed away inside California?
You could use that example in virtually every state where Republicans are in control, where Democrats are voting at 48, 49%, and yet you're seeing their legislature be redistricted in a way where 60 to 65% of the seats are safe for Republicans. And that, unfortunately, is just part of the political process. That's the country we've signed up for. That's the Constitution we live under. Those are the rules that are in place. Do we like it? No. If we could, we would have all 50 states, to the extent that they can, have an independent redistricting commission. It's Democrats and blue states that have these independent redistricting commissions. Republicans reject that. They want to play with power. They want the power of being able to gerrymander. And so this is our pushback. You know, I think when you're taught as a young kid, or if you're a new parent, you teach your kids to not let bullies bully you. And this is California standing up and telling Donald Trump, no, we're not going to let you bully us and bully the House of Representatives just because you can. And so it appears that Gavin Newsom doesn't want to be bullied, and he's setting an example for the rest of the country.
Before we continue with the rest of this interview, let's take a look at some of the key headlines in our newspaper Epoch Times on California. Governor Newsom just vetoed a bill that was going to take PFAS out of cookware and other products. If this was going to go into law, a lot of the manufacturers would have to change the way they produce this type of cookware. It could have increased the cost of these appliances. This is the reason Governor Newsom decided to veto it, but he agreed that this is a big problem. California has produced its own insulin pens now, and he's selling it at $11 starting next year per pin. And pharmacies in California can buy them at about 20% discount and sell them at the same price. This is going to offer about 90% of savings for people that use insulin here in California. Trump administration is withholding about 41 million of transportation funds from California, saying that California drivers are not meeting the English requirements for truck drivers. California has been debating that this is not the case, and California is following all the national rules when it comes to this. Make sure to check out our newspaper, Epoch Times. There's so many other headlines on national, international, and China that you may not see in any other newspaper. We go above and beyond to talk to different sides of the story, different players, and make sure we provide the information as accurately as possible so you can make up your own minds. Make sure to subscribe today. You can click on the link below, and for $1, you'll get a lot of value from this newspaper. Now, Michael, you're in the political world and you see this division, this kind of fights happening. Is there a way for things to change and it become more civil?
Well, I think Aaron Burr, back in the Founding Fathers, he basically went out and had a duel with pistols to end a political debate. We don't do that. When President Lincoln was president, we had a civil war where states and families were torn apart and grabbed their muskets and rifles and went and killed each other. We don't do that. So in the sense of where we started as a country to where we were, 100 years later as a country to where we are now, it is light and day different. We are in a great country where you can have a political debate, where you can, disagree with your neighbor and your fellow family member and still, come together in a few weeks for Thanksgiving, for example, and have your turkey and mashed potatoes.
Do you have a thought for people that completely disagree with you?
Let's go get In-N-Out right after this. Let's have a burger. Let's have a double-double. I have family members that disagree with me, and I still love and adore them. There's nothing wrong with disagreement. God made us all different. He gave us all different fingerprints. We have different interests and different likes and different dislikes. That's what makes not only the United States an amazing place to live, but specifically California, where we accept everyone. We are the ultimate melting pot. And that means sometimes you're going to disagree with your neighbor. And I would say that's a good thing, as long as it's civil. Some people don't have the emotional intelligence or the emotional capability to take that to heart and not get physical. And for that, there should be a punishment. Violence is not the way to solve any political debate at all. But compared to where we were as a nation, during the Civil War or during our starting with our founding fathers, I think we're in a much better place. I think every generation thinks it's, the most violent generation or this or that. But when you really take a step and think back to the previous times and look at our history books, it'll tell you that we've sort of grown up a little bit. But there are definitely things we can do that's better for our country in terms of coming together and having a civil debate.
Now we come back to Mike Gatto to conclude our discussion with Mike. Do you think that this will cause the parties and people that are in politics not to work together in the long run?
Absolutely. If you're creating districts that in Texas just favor Republicans and in California just favor Democrats, it's not only that the parties will feel like they can act with impunity. It's not only that those Congress members will feel like, well, I can do what I want to do because there's always going to be something that saves my district. What I'm more concerned about is the voters. I'm concerned about voters. I'm concerned about the Democratic voter in Texas who feels I don't have a voice. So why am I going to participate at all? And I'm concerned about the Republican in California who says, I don't have a voice. So why am I going to bother voting at all? That is another risk to the long-term health of our country. The sad thing about a lot of our traditions is that they depend on having ethical people in power. And that is something right now that has been chipped away at quite a bit. You look at the 2000 election, you had the party in power. It was President Clinton and Vice President Gore had to basically, once the Supreme Court ruled that it was time to stop the counting, Al Gore had to preside over the Senate to declare his opponent the president. And you think about what strength of character that took, where he had to say, I respect the rule of law. I disagree with it with every fiber of my being. I disagree with the Supreme Court ruling, but I respect the rule of law. That's what makes the United States different. Now, the traditions, the rule of law, things like this, they get chipped away at. I'll give you another example. In this country, articles of impeachment were usually very rare. I mean, like they were introduced in the Andrew Johnson presidency, they were introduced in the Nixon presidency, maybe a few other times. Since the Clinton presidency, every single president has faced articles of impeachment. It just becomes yet another thing, right? Yet another thing that they do. With this redistricting battle, the idea of respect for the other side, the idea of having respect for different viewpoints is completely eroding in this country. When I was growing up, I was always taught, I hate everything you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And you think about how powerful that is, how confident that is, how different that is compared to many places in the rest of the world. But again, that's what made this country what it was, or what it is. And now it's like, gee, that person said one thing I disagree with, so I think that person should be canceled. And I think that person should have no right to talk at all. And I think that person should, lose their job and lose their and like that is so detrimental to having a free exchange of ideas, because if people don't feel comfortable to express things, then what is the power of free speech, right? It is vanished. And I think that mutual respect that members of different parties might have shared and the ability to work together, it goes down a little bit every year. The challenge is, will it ever go down to the point where it does not exist at all? And if it does not exist at all, what option does the other faction have? That is the type of thing, and I don't want to be dramatic, but that's the type of thing that leads to civil war.
Now, in terms of bringing this respect back, you grew up in California, right?
I did.
And this is a leading state in the nation and in the world. It doesn't matter what people say, but a lot of the innovation, technology, a lot of ideas come from California. Do you think there is a way for California to do this, or can it come from outside of politics? Or
yeah, people should never underestimate the power of one person to make a difference. And when I say that comment, I'm addressing my comments not just to voters, not just to people who fund politicians, but also to the politicians themselves. Courage begets courage. When a legislative body acts like scared sheep and they all stampede in one direction, they're showing that they don't have courage. But if one person has the ability and has the moral fiber and the backbone to stand up and say, I'm not going to support this. I'm not going to vote that way just because you told me to. I'm not going to treat the other side like they're all evil, because they're not. They're human beings just like me. I am going to treat the other side with respect. I am going to vote based on my conscience and my heart. That causes other lawmakers to do the same. And I think there have been periods in our country's existence and periods in the existence of other countries where there are very courageous people speaking up like that. Nelson Mandela, right? He inspired people in South Africa and all around the world to speak up. I have seen, when I look at the California legislature, there are periods where you have more courageous people, and there's periods where everybody acts the same way. I tell my friends in politics, it starts with you. It starts with you. And I think voters can take that approach too. It's very easy to say everybody else should do it, but it starts with you.
Former Assemblymember Mike Gatto, it was great to have you on California Insider.
It's always great to be here.
Let us know which guest you agree with and what your thoughts are. You can always comment or email us. You can email us at siamak@californiainsider.com. And remember, when you comment, consider everybody's opinion. We're trying to create a platform for discussion among different opinions. And respect is a key thing we need to bring back to our discussions in California. I'm Siamak Khorrami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.